what would you say to people who now, okay, and now is the time to hurry up and start like building up my bags to get into crypto, but how to avoid that fear of missing out,
Usually is the most standard advice. I say start small. Never invest what you can't afford to lose. I would not advise anyone to take out a loan to buy crypto, even though that could make sense. But
welcome back to yet another episode of the CryptoNoobz Podcast, where we talk about cryptocurrency and the world around it. I am your host, Nelson Ricardo.x, and I'm here with my co-host,
Lamont Astwood, aka Crypto Lambo.
And today, we're going to be talking about news of possible interest rate cuts by the Fed. So, Lamont, what are interest rates and why does the Fed control them?
All right. So, first of all, let's go over what are interest rates. Interest rates is basically the cost of borrowing money. Right? Let's say I have $100 and you ask me for $100. So let's assume I charge you an interest rate of 5%. So that means that when you pay me back, I want $105. I don't just want the $100. And the reason I'm charging you that 5% is by you borrowing that $100 from me, that's inconveniencing me because I could use that to spend on my own personal wants or needs, or I could have used that to invest in something else. But I am foregoing that opportunity to give that $100 to you. So for that inconvenience, I'm charging you $5. So that's the 5%. Now, the Federal Reserve, and why that matters with interest rates is the Federal Reserve is basically the bank of banks. So when you go to the bank and you borrow money, they charge you an interest rate, right? That interest rate comes from the Federal Reserve. And different countries have different forms of Federal Reserve. So in the Bahamas, we have the Central Bank of the Bahamas. In the US, they have the Federal Reserve. In Jamaica, they have, I forgot the exact name, but they have their own central bank. Almost every country has their own central bank or Federal Reserve in some form that basically acts as the bank for banks. So banks will borrow money from the Federal Reserve and they would use that money and they'll invest it by lending it to customers. If, let's go back to that same example, I charge you 5%, right? Now, let's say you want to lend that $100 out to somebody else, right? You can't lend that person $100 for nothing because if you lend them that $100 and you get the $100 back and you give that $105 back to me, you've lost $5 in this transaction, basically, right? So let's say, right, someone comes and they want to borrow money, you charge them 7%. So that means they have to pay you back $107. You give me back $105 and you make $2 on the deal. That's basically the difference. I charged you a 5% interest and you charge them a 7% interest to get a 2% interest differential. And that's basically why interest rates matter in the context of Federal Reserve. Because the Federal Reserve, what they're charging the banks have to turn around and basically add like a little piece onto that to charge the average everyday person who's coming to borrow money from them. And a lot of it has to do with like how basically it impacts spending habits. Like I told you, I gave you, when we was having a conversation, I referenced Game of Thrones and I said Donald Trump is Joffrey Baratheon. If you ever watch Game of Thrones, you know Donald Trump is basically Joffrey Baratheon, and Jerome Powell, who's the chair of the Fed, so basically he's the head of the Federal Reserve, he is Tywin Lannister. When you look at when the Baratheons and Lannisters were on top of Game of Thrones, Joffrey was the king. He was the figurehead, right? And he had to say that he's the king. And Tywin told him, anyone who has to say they're the king, they're not the king, right? Tywin, in reality, was the most powerful man in Westeros. But Joffrey was like the figurehead. He was the one who people, like he was like just the head, the face. But Tywin is the one who really held all the power. Jerome Powell, I use that example is because Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve, they decide interest rates, and that's going to decide how the economy performs. Now, Donald Trump is obviously going to take credit regardless of what their decision is. If it ends up good, he's going to take credit for it. If it ends up bad, he's probably going to blame Jerome Powell. That's kind of like how he is. That's, real. That's his personality. But yeah, that's just a breakdown of the interest rates and why it matters in this context.
But that actually brings me to a next question, right? You would have explained to us what interest rates are, but them being cut, we're now hearing rumors of interest rates being cut. What does that mean, first and foremost, and how does that affect us, the people, even the economy? It
definitely does impact us. It impacts everyone who's watching this, interest rates, the Federal Reserve, because it's a trickle-down effect, really. But basically, them cutting interest rates is just them lowering interest rates. So the Federal Reserve usually does one or two things. They usually cut interest rates or they increase interest rates. They call it interest rate hike. And that goes based on their feeling of, there's a term that you have, you watch a lot of Bloomberg and Yahoo, finance, they'll say stuff like hawkish and dovish. So dovish is like
Mhm.
when they're feeling like, okay, they can lower interest rates to make borrowing money cheaper for people, right? Hawkish is when they're saying, okay, inflation's heating up. We got to slow down this excessive spending. So we're going to increase interest rates to discourage as much borrowing. Because remember, when the interest rates are too high, people are not going to take out loans, or they're going to be kind of conservative with the amount they take out on a loan. And when you lower interest rates, it basically makes it cheaper for banks to borrow money from the Federal Reserve, thus making it cheaper for banks to issue money to the public. So the public will now borrow more money because the cost of borrowing money is cheaper now if they have an interest rate cut. And the reason why it matters in this context is it'll speed up spending. You'll have more people, like I mentioned earlier, more people start taking on car loans, home loans. They'll start taking on personal loans for stuff. And you'll see more people taking vacations using money because it's cheaper to borrow the money. If it's more expensive to borrow the money, people are going to cut back. So that's basically the whole context of why it matters in this sense.
So, and I'm also seeing where some market reactions, right? So crypto markets responded sharply. Bitcoin jumped 4% to about $117,000. Ethereum surged 14% to $4,789. And altcoins like XRP, Solana, and Dogecoin also posted significant gains. So one of the things that I'm trying to see, and even in addition to that, other sectors like crypto stocks, like MicroStrategy and Coinbase also jump. So why? So because of these interest rates being cut, not even the interest rates being cut, but this is just, they haven't even been cut yet. This is just news that they have been, that they're going to be cut, right? Why is the crypto market now jumping? Is it because now people have more money that they could borrow and now they could actually pour it into cryptocurrency? What is going on there?
So basically, they haven't been cut yet. They're looking to probably, and it's just a big indication that they're going to be cut based on the speech from Jerome Powell. The reason that people are buying into it now is because when the interest rates are actually cut, people can borrow money and people have more access to money to invest in stuff like crypto. So you have like when the news drop, it's basically people getting ahead of the curve. You know, if I know in a month or two that an asset is going to be bought more by the public, thus increasing the price, even if the circumstances that facilitate that increase in purchasing isn't there yet, if I have access to funds where I can purchase that now to get ahead of the curve, I'm going to do that. So that's basically what you're seeing. You're seeing people actually purchasing the crypto now because when that interest rate cut hit, more people are going to have funds to be able to buy the crypto. You see, so it's just them reacting to the news of it. So that's what's happening right now. And also, I haven't checked the stock market as yet, but I'm willing to bet that you probably have like certain tech stocks that increase. Usually stocks like in the financial sector, like banks, they tend to lag during this time because a lot of them, profit margin might not be there as much. But usually you'll get like a lot of tech stocks will increase as well whenever they have like interest rate cuts. But yeah, that's basically what's happening now because the perception is that the cost of borrowing is going to be cheaper. A lot of the investors now are getting ahead of the curve because they know when the new investors come in or the returning investors come and they're going to purchase more crypto, it's going to increase the price of those assets.
Usually, if you look at the market, the crypto market, it actually happens in cycles, and it's also very seasonal. Now, I know that October is coming, and we sometimes call it Uptober because it's usually when when crypto actually starts to go up. But what would you say to people who want to get into crypto, but how to avoid that fear of missing out? What would you say to people who now, okay, and now's the time to hurry up and start like building up my bags and what's not, and they're going crazy because they really want to get in? What advice would you give to those people with the fear with that?
Usually is the most standard advice. I say start small. Never invest what you can't afford to lose. I would not advise anyone to take out a loan to buy crypto, even though that could make sense. But this is not financial advice. I'm not going to tell you to do it or not to do it. Everyone, they know their own financial situation, so they love to make that decision on their own. Some people can afford to do that, others can't. So that is something you have to be very careful of. I would say find a reputable exchange and like start small, especially if you don't really know how the crypto world works. You don't really know how you don't have a lot of experience. You don't want to go investing your total life savings into a coin or a crypto asset. Because let me tell you something, the crypto market might be jumping as a whole, but you might invest in a certain crypto asset who might have a systemic issue. They might have an issue with specific to them. They might be involved in something that tanks them. So you see everybody else is going up 30%, they're dropping 80%. And that happens. So that's why I say you have to do your own research and find out what coins are good. And that's what goes into another thing is diversification. If you was to give me, I'm just throwing out a number. Let's say if you was to give me $100,000, I probably wouldn't put $100,000 into 1 or 2 tokens. I'm spreading out that out between 15, 20, 25, 30 different tokens. And I'm going to pick the tokens that have good, they have a good track record. They have good news about them. They have probably a good projected future. So when you do stuff like that, you might see your portfolio rise over time. But that's basically diversification, not putting all your eggs in one basket. So yeah, that's just some general tips I would give.
Like that particular tip where you talk about start small. For a lot of people, they are trying to get into crypto and they don't know how much money they should be put in when they see these big numbers, this news saying, hey, right now cryptos are going to go up and what's not. They start to want to pour a big amount of money into it, not really know what they're doing. And I really like the advice of starting small, actually researching the different cryptos, starting small and diversifying. Diversify with some cryptocurrency. If you're just starting, diversify with cryptocurrencies that are just a little bit more stable. If you're just dipping your toe in the water before you actually go into the more riskier ones. I understand sometimes we might want to just dive head deep, but that's not the best recommended advice. Now, this does bring me to another question. If interest rates are now being cut and people now can spend more and all that good stuff, right? Because you're much more the finance and economics person. I'm much more of a tech type person.
It's not really. It can, and the reason it can is this is why the Fed is actually they're really cautious when it comes to cutting interest rates. Is something called inflation, because when you make the cost of borrowing money cheaper, you have more money basically being spent. So it's basically I don't know if you ever heard the term like too much money chasing too few goods. So basically, now, instead of an item, and I'm just throwing out an arbitrary number. Let's say if before time 100 people could have bought this item, now you have 500 people could buy this item. If it gets to that point, the dollar is essentially devalued because now whoever is selling that item could increase the price. So your dollar, what you had before, what could have bought that item, it can't buy that item anymore because basically the market responded to the demand. Because if the supply remains the same now, you have too much money chasing too few goods. So now you could say, hey, yeah, your dollar is essentially devalued. And that's why some people might think, why not just decrease interest rates on the whole? Like, no, they have to actually pay attention because they have to see how it's going to have effect as far as impacting inflation, stuff like that. Because especially like during COVID, it was just basically, it was just printing money. A lot of people don't realize a lot of the money that is in circulation, most of that, very high percentage of the money in the entire American economy was created during COVID. And so that was big fears of inflation during that time, but that was a national crisis. That was a national pandemic. So when you have stuff like inflation, that's one of the main reasons why you see that. And that's what goes back into what I said earlier about hawkishness and dovishness, because when the Federal Reserve is worried intensely about higher inflation, they tend to take a more hawkish approach. That means that, okay, we're going to cut interest rates so we could decrease spending in the economy so things can kind of regulate and get back to a normal pace. So yeah, it can if it's decreased by too much. And that's why you see like they don't just say, hey, every month we're going to decrease rates. It's like, no, it actually takes a lot of meetings, a lot of different reports, a lot of information, it actually almost is like a voting system actually in the Federal Reserve. So it isn't just, oh, I feel like we need to decrease interest rates today. No, it's like a long process for them to cut interest rates by like 0.25%. That's that's a significant, it might not feel like a lot, but 0.25% could change the trajectory of an economy. So
that's an entire country's economy.
Yeah,
but
that's
given the fact that that's the U.S.'s economy, let's bring it back home for a second. Does that affect the Bahamas and the Caribbean?
Yeah, definitely. Because I've heard the term, if the U.S. catches a cold, like if the U.S. needs this, the Bahamas catches a cold, right? We get a lot of funds from the U.S., stuff like that, and especially like with Caribbean nations. So, and you got to also look at it from our industry. Our industry is primarily tourism, right? 85% of our tourists, probably 85-90% of our tourists come from the United States. If the United States is not doing well, that's going to impact us. Now, if they were to decrease rates and more people start spending in the US, you will have more people taking vacations. Because remember, if the people can't afford to take vacations, they're not going to they're not going to travel to take a vacation. They'll either vacation in like internally within the country, just go to a different state or city. And because the US is so big, you could experience a totally different culture just going one state over. Right.
Mm.
So when they have more free money or more basically cheaper money, that's when you're going to see them travel to the US. Travel to the Bahamas, Barbados, Jamaica, and it's going to boost our economy. From even a tourism, then you have like offshore investments. It's going to also come from that angle as well. But yeah, definitely whatever they do, it does impact us.
I'm also reading here saying crypto market confidence rebounds to greed. The crypto Fair and Greed Index, previously neutral, surged to greed, a score of 60 after Powell's dovish tone, signaling heightened bullish sentiment. Bullish forecasts, Bitcoin may rally through 2027, unless Bernstein proposed that the new bull run, that this bull run might extend well beyond the standard crypto cycle, even into 2027. But would you say that right now we're in a bull market or we're moving to a bull market?
I think this is definitely a bull run. And I think whether we're in a bull market depends on the economy itself. So if the economy is doing well, yeah, we're definitely going to head into a bull market. Remember, whatever the economy is doing, that's going to ultimately impact crypto. Because if people don't have the money to buy crypto, they're not going to buy crypto. That's just the reality of it. But I could definitely see, even when you look at cycles, I could definitely see crypto going up over the next, especially like next year or so. I think there's a lot of runway for the crypto markets. Ethereum sitting all time high. I feel like Ethereum is just catching up. Every other crypto has been killing it, and Ethereum has just been like just watching the scene. I don't know, but finally feels like Ethereum is catching up.
Yeah, Ethereum was taking its nice sweet time, and I'm so happy that they finally starting to move. They finally touched back at 4,000 and breaking past that into new all-time highs. I'm very happy for Ethereum. I'm very proud of those guys. Now with this whole interest rates cutting and people now starting to rally back up, right? What I want to understand is what are some of the when
probably over borrowing and overspending. They might think too casually when it comes to taking out loans and all that. That's a mistake a lot of us make. I made that mistake. Basically, it's like because things are good now, some people might not realize that there are other factors at play that might not make things as good in the future. So especially like when you're making big purchases like homes and stuff, I'm not like a homeowner expert or anything, but that's something you have to really consider and you have to take into consideration when you're dealing with that. Yeah, like a lot of people, they might overspend or borrow things like that. And a lot of banks, they might have to taper their they will have to also kind of be more conservative. I don't want to say like be more conservative. They are already conservative, but they can't get too carried away because of the low interest rates. So they still have to be mindful of how much people they allow loans, the amounts they allow to lend out, stuff like that. Then businesses also will have to make sure that when they borrow to invest in their business, that it's a feasible investment. They don't really get too carried away on that end as well. So it's just, not drinking, not like doing too much, basically during this time. Not doing too much, not getting too carried away.
So, and this is just for just giggles, right? But not really for giggles. But so what do you think is what prediction would you say is going to happen? What do you think is going to happen after these rates have been cut and we are going to the end of this year, 2025? What do you think is going to be the end result of these rates being slashed, people rallying and buying all this crypto or what's not? Like, what do you actually think is going to happen? Do you think they're going to take it back and increase rates coming around the end of the year? Or is it that you think they're just going to keep it down? And how do you think the people are going to respond?
That's a question I can't answer. And to be honest, the people who are going to cut the rates probably can't answer it either. Basically, they're just trying to see, and this is why they usually do like a 25 basis point or basis point, like 0.25%. They don't want to do too much at one time. You see, because they're basically doing that to see how the market responds. And based on how it responds after the rate cut, I forgot the timeline will be like for the next rate cut because they don't do it like, is it like every 3 or 4 months, 3 or 6 months, something like that. Basically, when they have the next, committee chair meeting, they'll have to assess the job market. They'll have to assess imports, exports. They'll have to make assessments how the economy itself performed prior to the rate cut. What is the impact banks, how they're doing and all that. Also, they'll have taken consideration. Remember, we talked about weakening of the dollar. They'll have to take in consideration the risk of inflation, you see, to decide if they're going to either keep rates steady or they're going to cut rates again. Because remember, rates have been the same. They haven't had an interest rate cut in years because they had so much during like post-COVID and all that, trying to basically get the economy moving again. When things cleared up now, they just basically like they had some cuts. I think they either had some cuts, but I know they tried to keep it steady. They didn't touch interest rates for a long time. This is why this is like big news, because this is the first time the interest rate's been cut in a long time. But it'll ultimately be how it performs, how the economy performs over the next coming months after the cut. That's going to dictate what they do moving forward.
Fair. What I think is, I do think, especially in the Trump's regime, they have if anything else, they have definitely backed up how they want to be more crypto positive and making steps to allow more adoption of crypto and more people to invest in crypto. Now, definitely also Trump himself and his family is investing in crypto and creating their own cryptos and all of that. So I do think crypto is definitely here to stay. Market adoption is right around the corner. And even these interest rate cuts, I do sincerely believe that this is going to be leading to a bull run. This is my personal opinion, not financial advice, but I think that it is going to be leading there. Now, they might eventually, some news might come out that would say, slow it down. But I do think that eventually we're going to see a bull cycle like never before. And it's going to be one of those long-term change your life kind of cycles. But that's my personal opinion, not to be taken as financial advice. What final words would you?
My set of final words would be get knowledgeable before you decide to take out. And remember, the rate cuts has not been is not been in place as of yet. So I don't want you to go to the bank on Monday and say, "Hey, Jerome Powell said this," and blah blah blah. No. No, it's not been taken effect as yet. But I'll just say, be careful on how you maneuver during this time. Like, don't get greedy. I think as Warren Buffett said, be fearful when others are greedy, be greedy when others are fearful. Yeah, I would say just make sure don't, and like I say, too much, basically don't do too much. Don't do too much borrowing if all right, if this could negatively impact you. Because remember, all of this has a trickle-down effect. Some people might hear this thing like interest rate cuts and don't think it impacts them. Like, no, it impacts almost every facet of society. And that's why I go back to, Jerome Powell is probably one of the most powerful men in America. He might not look it or act it, but me definitely is. So yeah, I would say, just be careful. Don't go over investing in a crypto you don't know about. And if you're going to borrow or take out a loan to invest in crypto, once again, it's not financial advice. Make sure diversify into solid projects. I don't want you just go diversifying into 50 meme coins and losing all your money. You have to diversify into solid. Yeah. Because trust me, I don't get what interest rate saying you're going to be broke. That's just the reality of it. That's the reality of that situation. So I would say, if you're going to probably start hearing more about crypto, because you're hearing about crypto in all-time highs. Definitely, if you want to get in at this time, I would just say approach it responsibly. Just diversify and get knowledgeable. If you invest in a coin, understand who the CEO or the team is. Give yourself a valid reason on why you're investing in that coin.
To our audience, recently Kanye West had dropped the coin, Yeezy coin, that went to, I think, about 3 billion. The day that it dropped, and then went all the way down to 1 billion, and it's just been crashing ever since.
Yeah.
So remember, be careful what you invested in.
Because let me tell you something. Kanye West is one of my favorite celebrities because he's crazy, right? But just because I can enjoy somebody because they're crazy, don't mean I'll invest in them. Like their vision, no, I'm gonna listen to him rant because it's entertaining. It's just entertaining when he spazzes out on Twitter or X or whatever you call it now. It's entertaining. But I am not gonna trust my financial future with that man. I am sorry. I am just sorry. And I'm not saying you couldn't get a pump. Like, you had people who made money, but that is an investment strategy to say, I'm going to invest in Kanye West and what he have going on. Because Kanye is going to be okay. He's a global brand. He could go broke tomorrow and he's going to be okay. He'll have money by next week. Like, by tomorrow, actually. Kanye is always going to be okay. So remember, you're going to be stuck with your negative money or zero money. Kanye is just going to do a show or two, make $100,000 per show or $200,000, whatever he's charged, and he's going to be back on his feet.
Yeah, but Lamont, as always, thank you once again. And to our audience, thank you once again for watching another episode of the CryptoNoobz Podcast. We invite you to check out our website, CryptoNoobz, spelled CryptoNoobz.xyz.com. You could go on there. We have some free resources. If you click on the resources page, you could also follow our different social medias at CryptoNoobz, as well as at CryptoNoobz on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, well, X, and even now TikTok, and even listen to us on Spotify. Once again, we appreciate you guys, and we'll just keep it up. If you have any topics that you would like us to specifically talk on concerning beginner level crypto basics or things that you really want us to touch on, just give us a comment, message us, let us know how you feel about it. You guys. What would you say to people who now, okay, and now's the time to hurry up and start like building up my bags and what's not, and they're going crazy because they really want to get in. What advice would you give to those people with the fear
Um,
of with that?
Usually is the most standard advice. I say start small. Never invest what you can't afford to lose. I would not advise anyone to take out a loan to buy crypto, even though that could make sense. But